Welcome to episode 2 of Clixsy Unfiltered. I'm your host, Corey. I brought with me today two of my esteemed business partners, Will Pettet and Mark Luckenbaugh. And as I mentioned on the first show, I'm doing this really off the cuff and just making sure that we get the show produced regardless of any constraints or missing technology or style or editing or anything like that. It's I called it my Costanza method because I'm doing everything the opposite of the way I would normally do things, which is overthink it and overcomplicate it. So here's the logo for the show today, Clixsy Unfiltered, episode 2. We're talking about the Google Vicinity update, which rolled out in late November, early December 2021, and it has rocked the local search scene. And today, we are going to talk about what are some of the observations that we've been able to see from the data over the last 60 days since the update rolled out. What are some of the takeaways? What are some of the things that we think can be done to improve it? And whether or not we think that Google is also going to be making some course corrections. So welcome, Will and Mark. I appreciate you both being able to join me today.
Thank you.
Will, you mentioned...
Thanks, Corey.
Yeah, absolutely. Will, you mentioned you wanted to start out first. You had a thought that you wanted to share about the update.
Well, first, Corey, thank you for having us on, and thank you for that awesome intro music. It was very inspiring and uplifting, and I was surprised at the notes you could hit. That was inspirational, kind of angelic. I imagined you as an angel coming down from the sky as you were singing. It was quite beautiful. Well, and I like that you're keeping this podcast what I would call raw and real.
Unfiltered, baby.
Raw and real. Kind of like your canyoneering adventures. They're very raw and real. So that's exciting. So what we're noticing with the Vicinity update is similar to what we experienced back in 2014. Stay with me, folks. If you remember the liger update, the liger is a powerful animal. It's half lion and half tiger. And Google rolled out one of their greatest algorithms at that time. And it's similar to what we're seeing now on the local scene. This shakeup is causing all kinds of undeserving rankings, especially in the maps. And we're going to stay focused on the maps here and talk about what we're seeing. But I'm noticing with a lot of our geogrids with our clients and our competition, some of them have been hit, particularly in, since we're in the personal injury space, the personal injury keywords seem to have had the biggest shakeup, where we have folks that are showing up in certain locations that added personal injury to their GMB category, or sorry, Google My Business or Google Business Profile, GBP category. And some of these are criminal defense attorneys and really had no rhyme or reason to show up. And so after this, after January is over, the dust kind of settled and we're starting to see our rankings regain. But for the secondary case type keywords like car accident, truck, motorcycle.
Before you move forward, do you mind if I just ask a quick question on what you just said? Are you saying that Google dynamically changed their listings without their knowledge? It just happened during the update and now they have these additional categories?
Oh, no, it's other law firms that have added that or have had that as a secondary category. Yeah.
Okay, great.
So that's what I meant by undeserving. It doesn't make sense in some of these locations. We noticed that those that were consistently in the top 3 across our grid reports, had recent reviews. So they had reviews from local guide accounts. In the reviews themselves, they talked about, they had emotional trigger words like professional, or they had keywords in there, but they had recent reviews and review activity. It's interesting to see now that the dust has kind of settled, how much of the rankings have regained for our clients itself, as well as some of our competitors and some of our associates. And it really, what I believe, speaks to this whole movement of really focusing on the brand, and even more than the brand would be the authority. And that's where I think Mark has some ideas about authority itself.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And just before we turn to Mark to hear his thoughts on it, I just wanted to bring up something that I had mentioned a few weeks back in my weekly email, which relates to what you just said, Will, which is that there's this idea sometimes that there's sort of like rankings are static, and then an algorithm update happens, and then these static rankings just sort of like immediately adjust from where they are to whatever the new rules of the algorithm are after this update. And it sounds like what you're saying, and this matches with kind of my observations too, is that rather than doing it that way, Google just sort of tossed everything into the air, shook it all up, and then there's this after effect where it's settling down. Is that?
And if you think about the idea of brands and Google wanting to show brands and display brands, because brands typically bring offline traffic to online. So why wouldn't Google reward those that are bringing traffic to their search engine? Amazon does the same exact thing. They reward the product listings that bring traffic to Amazon. So I'd see that it'd be the same thing. And if Google monetizes user behavior, wouldn't that make sense that most of the algorithm is moving towards that? What is a user doing? So branded search, brand activity, reviews, the engagement of those reviews, and then how the business utilizes the Google business profile. What we've seen too is those that didn't suffer much of an impact were running, the smart ads, which is something that you've really mastered there, Corey, as the landing page for the smart ads is the Google business profile. So it's getting traffic. So it's paid traffic to the Google business profile listing. On top of that, you have branded traffic. So those are some of the observations. Some of the stuff just doesn't make sense whatsoever. Like I said, undeserving Google business profiles ranking when they shouldn't be ranking. Like they have 1-star review, but it was recent. They had their personal injury as their secondary category. They rank right where their office is located. So where our clients would once dominate, now this listing is showing up. So maybe it's just Google's way of, allowing businesses opportunity to be visible and see if they'll get more interactions, because they do that type of auditioning daily with your website. You can see it in Search Console.
And Mark, you had some thoughts about this. You phrased it a little differently. Do you want to elaborate on this idea of sort of all the listings just being tossed into the air and then seeing where they fall?
Sure. Yeah. So thanks. I think if we could take even a step further back, this is a massive update, right? And I can see that the feedback from the update has already been overwhelmingly negative, where there's a lot of very authoritative brands that have done all the right things, right, over the period of time in which they or their agencies have been working on the listings. There's an uproar. The community feedback has been overwhelmingly negative, which is, it's one thing, from the spam community when a good update comes that kind of negates a lot of the spam work that has been done. We celebrate that for the most part. This is way different. These are very established brands that have been focusing on a lot of really high quality white hat optimization for a lot of years. They've dominated because of that. And I know it's like you and I's conversation the other day, it almost seems like a randomization occurred, because there are things that I'm sure they targeted, and there's a lot of data out there suggesting they targeted keywords in the name and stuff like that, things that have been blatantly used as a vehicle of rank manipulation, right?
Yeah.
For several years now. Having said that, there's also, when we've looked at data, and we've also looked at data put out by just other marketers trying to share their thoughts, and there's a lot of contrarian outputs there, where it's like, well, hang on a second, some of the largest movers kind of counteract the entire point where there was no keyword in the name, but they still got punished severely. And it's hard to isolate. And again, you start ticking the boxes. It's like, hey, this was a really great SEO campaign here. There's no black hat blemishes on the marketing, deliverables that their agency has provided. So it starts to become a bit of a mystery, and that's where it kind of goes back to saying there was a massive shakeup. And I would, even though this isn't everything's rolling out and whatever, but this isn't super new. It's rolled out. I want to be surprised if we see some updates that start rectifying some of the changes that occurred, like false positives from the algorithm where they determined a listing to be spammy or low quality. I want to be surprised to see that, because I think there's been way too much bad rather than good that came out of it. Seems like a shotgun blast approach to try to mitigate like keyword stuffing in the names and whatnot.
Can you elaborate a little bit on why? What is it about what you've seen that seems to indicate to you that there was more of a great reset to steal some from the news cycle, as opposed to a really uniform, systematic application of like a new set of algorithmic rules?
Sure, it's a good question. It can start to become a little blurry, but it's nice to be able to look at large swaths of data. So, for example, at Clixsy, just with some of the technology we've built, we have the opportunity to look at lots of data. So what we can do is we can start to create almost taxonomies of what a good listing is, right? Okay, yeah. They have all of their GBP data filled out. They have they're linking to a high quality landing page that checks boxes in terms of good structured data. It's optimized well. It's not spammy. Like we can start to create, almost imagine a data dump for anyone listening into an Excel sheet of, let's say there's 100 or 200 different things that we know good listings have, and you can get pretty granular, but we'll keep it a bit more broad just for time purposes. But in a lot of cases, you say, okay, here's what makes for a low quality listing, and it's like they're missing images, they're not having any type of work done. It's a keyword stuff description. It looks spammy, right? It can be a lot of different things. It can be like thin listings. It looks like blatant spam. A lot of different things can kind of check the box on the negative side. But we can build enough data and say, hey, here's a cluster of no-nos, if you will. And a lot of times, when you see large scale algorithmic updates, you can start to cluster the affected listings, and they start to have a lot of those commonalities, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of those cases where that isn't the case, not to sound redundant, but it's one of those issues where you start to have really high quality, long-standing brands that some have been rewarded now. They did not have the keywords stuffed in their name, and they all of a sudden popped up, and they're now dominating their market. And in other cases, though, it's vice versa, where another brand that was dominating, a large injury lawyer that was dominating their market, did not have keywords stuffed in their name. They lost most of their visibility. Now, why? When you start to look at the data points, they're identical, right? They're identical in terms of quality, in terms of the good work that's been done. Why did they flip flop? And I hate to start swiping a theory brush across the canvas, but you start to think back on a lot of the randomization patents that Google has. They're searchable. I'm not saying that's what this is. It almost makes you wonder. It's like some of this it almost looks like they just wanted to mix the listings up and cause a ruckus. And I hate to, it almost seems like an oversimplification, but it's if you can't make enough if you can't find enough negatives on the listing to say, oh, that was a bad listing, this was a positive update, right?
Yeah.
To clean out bad listings, it starts to lead you down a different path. And I mean, they do have those patents and whatnot. So I don't know. I was a bit confused when I saw that they definitely targeted keywords in the business name. Like, certainly that seems to be the case, but there's just a lot of cases where really dominant brands fell for no reason and others kind of took their place, and doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to it.
So Will, you've been a big proponent over the years of this idea that brand signals sort of mirror online from offline.
Yep.
To what degree do you think that was turned up or down, or remained the same?
I think it still remains the same. It's just in the data sets that I've looked at, those that really seem to have benefited from this update were large brands. But now I'm seeing some of that setback too. So really it comes down to, in my opinion, the consistency of signals. It's no longer a set it and forget it. The client needs to do their part with getting reviews, business photos. You got to keep, like Mark said, keep building that authority and making sure that the site's doing well, and the GBP is doing well. And again, those that are getting search traffic from like smart ads, paid traffic to the listing itself. I mean, those are user engagement signals to the business listing. A review is a user engagement signal, so that's what I'm seeing. And I would say that it's just always the same thing. Search engines want businesses that bring traffic.
So
that's any platform.
And so I've one other question for both of you, and then I wanted to elaborate a little bit on what I've been seeing too. But oh man, my screen share is not working. That's going to mess up everything.
Don't worry, Corey, I'm calling in from prison.
I just wanted to see if either of you object to us calling this update the Klaus update, because it was the Great Reset.
Oh, look at that.
Huh? Isn't he a good looking guy with his like space vest? Looks like he's ready to commandeer the planet.
Nice. Kind of reminds me of Marty McFly.
Jeez.
So here's what I'm seeing. I think that, and this, I think this aligns with what you're talking about, Will. The idea that keyword stuffing has been punished. I don't know that we're definitely seeing that it has some effect with this new update. It's definitely been impacted, but what I think is yet to be determined, and I think Mark kind of touched on this a little bit, is it's especially like with personal injury, what we don't know for sure yet is how much of it is going to be able to be borne out in what's a brand versus what's a keyword, right? Because there's a lot of these firms that have keywords in their brand. And, I've noted, I have a bit of a unique perspective on this because of how much I deal with the paid ads side of everything. We've been seeing for the last 2 years, and I think there's parallels you can follow from the paid to the organic side. And for the last 2 years, we've seen Google messing around with match types. And as a result, one of the things that we've started to see frequently is there's becoming a blurring of the lines and sort of a conflation between branded and non-branded terms. And so the way we first started observing this was when we would do brand defense PPC campaigns to try to knock down poachers, into the second or third ad position. And then we started seeing two things happen. One is we were spending on non-branded terms, even though we were using exact match for the brand. And we'd have to go in and consistently add non-branded terms to the negative keywords. But then additionally, we would get emails and cease and desist letters from competitors. And they would say, quit bidding on our name. And we're literally bidding on our name. And they're like, why are you bidding on our name? And so that was when sort of the light bulb went off. We're like, holy crap, Google is conflating a brand with a non-branded concept. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch and see over the next, month or so, how are they going to be able to undo that distinction? Because I'm one who tends to believe that the algorithms they use for the paid side are not necessarily part and parcel or entirely separated out from the organic side. Like they have to have some correlation. And so even though we're seeing a lot of listings that seemingly have been punished, I think there's going to have to be a correction to account for the fact that certain brands have keywords in their name.
Of course. Look at CarMax. Type in car in the auto suggestion in Google and see how it suggests CarMax or Car Gurus, and then click on it. Pull some keyword research on CarMax. Look at how many branded searches they have. CarMax and city and state, CarMax online, where to shop, and then look at all the web properties that are built for that brand name. But the key is it all matches up, and it's the same thing people are using as their seed phrase. And there's user engagement, not only in the searches, but the reviews, all that, social media mentions. So
what I'd like to do now, thanks for offering your observations, each of you. What I'd like to do is just, if you could, I'd like to go back to both of you and have you just offer one piece of advice about what do you do about it? What would be your one best practice or reaction to the Google Vicinity update for somebody who wants to know, like, hey, I got hit. What do I do?
What you do is you find Jesus.
You find the journey for Jesus. I like that, Will.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in because I'm gonna have the worst answer to this, and I'm staring at you, Corey, to make sure your eyes don't roll as I offer this. No, I'm teasing. But anytime someone's like, "What's the one thing?" I always counter with like, "That's." I would never try to narrow it to one thing, and I know that wasn't to shoot back at you. I know that's what you get asked, right? The clients hit you up and say, "Hey, what's the one thing?" Or so that just to say, "Hey, here's the thing. It's the salt and pepper of a little bit of everything." So let's double down on what this really means. We know Google and the local Google ecosystem started switching heavily to a proximal based system years ago, right? We saw a lot of proximity updates, and it was the idea of convenience. There was papers written on it on how it was actually a little weird and wonderful at the same time. But Google wanted to basically, it's on your phone. Your location settings are enabled. Say you're out visiting a client, you're walking with them through their city, and you're like, wow, we'd love to have some Thai food. And Google would be able to notice you're walking, the pace, because the pace at which your geodata is updating, right? And it would be able to say, hey, we're not going to serve them, or we're going to try not to. I mean, no engine's perfect, but the idea is to say, hey, we need to serve them with the best Thai places in the closest proximity in which they can conveniently get there at the rate they're moving. So their idea is they want to be able to know if you're walking, you're on bike, you're in a vehicle, right? Like they want to be able to detect that and be able to serve you results based on convenience. That was the whole idea. The whole idea is if they can be your end all be all in terms of providing you with the best results, the fastest, the most convenient, then they win. That's how their shareholders win the local ecosystem battle, right?
Mhm.
So having said all that, it becomes a thing where like there's tons of business intelligence data on like how far someone will drive to see a dentist, or
Yeah.
and for every industry it's a little different. So we need to keep that in mind as Google continuously updates in terms of proximity and vicinity. So we know the format of the map changed, and just because the view is different, it almost looks like Google's going to provide a lower number of opportunities for you to even be in their view, right?
Mhm.
When you're searching from, whatever device, but in that area, your
Yeah.
convenience area, whatever area is, Google serving to try to get you the best results there. So then it's going to also start looking at other things. And we know this from, if you start to see like your review responses and how Google can pick out certain data in like the type of review people leave or the specificity of the content of the review. Like, if you have 100 reviews and they all say, hey, this attorney was wonderful with my car accident, and every review cites a car accident specific, right,
Mhm.
piece of content or blurb of content in that review, Google's going to take note of that if they're all 4 stars or better, right? They start to look at, like Will said a minute ago, it's all about signals. And there's
Yeah.
so many signals that Google's ingesting and parsing and analyzing that we have to have a very holistic approach. So to be a bit more actionable, because that was basically a really long-winded abstract, like, hey, you need to do a lot of things. Let's throw a couple things out. One, Google. Will mentioned reviews. That's
Yeah.
huge. Reviews, responding to the reviews, and also the specificity of review. As Google gets more sophisticated, I promise you're going to start being, when people query extremely specific problems, right? Or solutions to extremely specific problems, they're going to look at that to determine, hey, this is the best, and not to use superlatives here, but this is the best car accident
Mm.
attorney, right? This is
Yeah.
the best attorney to help me with this specific case type. Google's processing that information because, again, Google wins for its shareholders when it's winning the trust of the consumer. That is like, holy heck, they're delivering exactly the best option for me. They're doing all the heavy lifting. Another big one is, when Will mentioned photos, absolutely. And
Mhm.
where were those photos being uploaded from? There was the great debate in the SEO world, which most clients aren't going to know about, but it was the whole argument: is metadata, right? Is
Yeah.
EXIF data and photos really that impactful? And let's not unpackage that now, because that's boring.
No, that's a big,
And it's a big one. It's
yeah.
a big debate. But at the end of the day, I'd say, okay, sure, maybe it's not the biggest thing, but as a collective, when Google is seeing photos, especially user submitted photos being uploaded from different parts of the market, they're going to collate that data and they're going to look for patterns and say, oh,
Yeah.
well, so it's all those little things. It's making sure the pages are well optimized, and you have, I know Clixsy has a really impressive geo page strategy, and which obviously any of the Clixsy clients listening to this are going to know what that is. But for anyone that isn't actually engaged, it's a really impressive geo page strategy,
Yeah.
and that's important. And then that helps with geo specificity and coverage and showing authority, right?
Yeah.
Showing presence and on that specific level. So I could probably rattle on for another hour about it, but those are some big ones. Making sure that the content on your site, the architecture of it is, broken up, and you're being represented using your site and linking from your GBP to the proper pages, especially if you're multi-location. And those signals, like Will said, it's
Yeah.
all about a consistency in the signals and the specificity, and it's becoming a bit more sophisticated of a game. So
That gave me an idea for a future topic. At some point, we should talk about how specifically do you implement some of these things, like it's always a challenge to get more reviews and more good reviews. And then when you add an additional layer of complexity, like, hey, we'd love it if these reviews mentioned specific topics or used specific words. It'd be interesting, I think, to explore some tactics for doing that would be effective and help make that process a little bit more palatable for people, because you're running a business, so it's sometimes difficult to say, oh great, like it was already hard enough to get reviews, now I gotta figure out how do I make them say car accident lawyer when they leave the review, right? And then also the implementation of the photography with the metadata. I think there's ways we could probably explore that are leveraged and make those things a little bit easier. Well, it seems as though the internet did not want to hear Will's idea, his one thing. So he's dropped out. And I haven't seen him attempt to dial back in. So we'll just go on and move forward. So I will tell you that the one thing that I've been telling clients right now is you have to understand sort of the stages of an update being rolled out, and that when it hits, first of all, most people sort of think of the internet as being this uniform thing where everything happens instantaneously in real time. So Google updates and all websites, all search phrases, all update all at the same time. But in reality, Google is hosting servers throughout the world. And it takes time. It's just like if you've ever updated something on your website where it has to, the word for it is propagate. So it has to go from your changes, and then especially if you're using a CDN like Cloudflare, it has to propagate out to each and every one of those mirror servers. Well, Google has the exact same setup. Like they can't avoid that because that's the nature of how the internet works. Is that there are all these mirror servers with the same things, and so it has to, whenever there's an update, it takes time for that to propagate across the entire internet. So what you see is that you'll have isolated areas that are getting hit first by an update, and then you'll see more and more and more until you hit sort of the apex where it's fully propagated, and then starts that process of all the results sort of settling, right? So it's almost like this bell curve. Well, now add into that the further complexity of people reacting to what they're seeing. So they're going and making changes. And then Google having sort of swung a pendulum maybe perhaps too far and then bringing it back, right? So you have all of those things occurring simultaneously. So that was a really, really long way of saying sometimes the worst thing you can do is react. Sometimes the best thing to do, provided you're doing best practices and you're implementing the way you ought to be, is to persevere, push through, and do that for 6-8 weeks throughout this entire process, because it may be that what you end up doing is hurting yourself by reacting immediately until you've been able to really fully see what's happened and how the landscape's shifted. And then to Mark, to your earlier point also about the degree to which we have massive data to see, right? Because of the software that we have, where we can see millions of visits and thousands of Google My Business profile data. It's ideal, I think, to have someone on your team who has that type of perspective, because as a business owner, you generally see only one or a small handful of listings that you own. And so you're not able to see how it looks across multiple industries and multiple instances of the same industry. So I know that's not a super exciting answer to persevere, but a lot of times that's how I see people wreck themselves, is they panic in the early stages of an update. They update, and then you see corrections come in the form of additional, we'll call them patches to the update. And now you've sort of set yourself into this endless repeat loop where, are you reacting to the algorithm, or are you reacting to the changes that you made earlier in reaction to it? And then everything gets muddy and can be difficult to really tell what caused the problem.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
All right. Well,
I guess in summation, what you kind of said there, Corey, was you better check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself.
That's what I got out of that. I like that. I like that.
Right.
Those are wise words.
So the Klaus update, don't let it reset you. All right. Well, that is all for today's episode on the Google My Business, or Google Business. What the hell did they name it? Google Business Profiles, GBP.
Indeed.
We could have a whole episode about the various naming conventions.
The history of names. It's ridiculous. It's like on a cycle.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's also
number of years.
That's also another helpful insight that I think people should always keep in mind, is that these products are being designed by computer engineers, not experts in product development and product design. And so oftentimes they're sort of like functional, but not optimal, right? All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Clixsy Unfiltered, as we talked about the Google Vicinity update. If you have questions, as always, you can reach out directly to me at Corey@Clixsy.com. And of course, we're all hard at work every day, working for our clients. So if you have specific questions for Mark or Will, you can also reach us through that same channel, and I'll be happy to include them into the conversation and allow you to get any insights you'd like from any of us. So thanks so much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Clixsy Unfiltered.
Thanks a lot.